Alright guys, so I've got a really rough mold here, extremely rough, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to seal it up real good whenever I get these pieces in here. But the game plan here is I've got this oak gall that used to be one piece. It ended up breaking, and that's how it used to fit together there. But like I said, it broke in half, so I decided to use this opportunity to kind of put them about like this, leave a little space between them, and fill it up with some resin and put some blue mica powder in there and turn what I've seen called a dragon egg. They look pretty neat, so I figured I'd give it a try. Now before I glue this bottom on here, I wanted to go ahead and basically I'm going to put a dab of hot glue on there and then just kind of eyeball center like this, and I'll do the other side the same way. And then once those are glued in place where they're not going to move or float or anything like that, then we'll put it here on this base, and I'm going to make sure and use a lot of hot glue to seal up any cracks because I don't want to waste any of this resin. So. Alright, so we've got our mold set up here. We've got our two pieces glued into place and everything. So the resin we're going to be using today is called art resin. I've never messed with resin before, much less this brand, so we're going to see how it works out. But basically we're going to mix this 1-to-1, and I did the math here, so you need the width, the length, and the height of it. And I ended up getting about, it looks like I needed about 18 ounces. Now I do have a little bit of stuff in here to take up some of that space, so I figure what I'm going to do is these cups, they hold 8 ounces. So 8 and 8 16, that leaves me 2 ounces less. That should be plenty, and I should be able to get it up to the top here and cover everything with no problem at all. So we're going to do that, and we're also going to be putting in some mica powder. This is the kind that I've got here. I'll be sure and put a link down in the description below of everything that I'm using. And I don't know what this color is called. I guess Cessio, unless that's the brand. I don't know, it's blue. But it's mica powder. So it's non-toxic, cruelty-free. Cool. Let me get some gloves on real quick because I'm sure this is going to get messy. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to mix this 1-to-1, stir it up. It says to stir it for at least 3 minutes. And then once we get it stirred pretty good, we'll go ahead and add some of this mica powder in as well. Alright guys, so as you can see there's a crack right here down through this. I did some research on the type of resin I was using, and apparently you're only supposed to pour, they only recommend pouring an 1/8 inch at a time. So I thought I'd seen some other people use this specific type of resin to do casts before, but maybe they did, you know, a quarter of it, and then, you know what I mean, did a quarter at a time instead of doing it all at once. I could have definitely done half at a time at least, and seen how that worked out. It may have still cracked, I'm not sure, but they recommend only doing an 1/8 inch at a time, which is of course why it overheated and caused these cracks here. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and mix up the smallest amount I can make in these cups, which it looks like about 2 ounces. And what we're going to do is go ahead and pour it down into here and try and fill these cracks up. So hopefully it'll keep this thing all one solid piece, so that way we can turn it. Alright guys, we've let this set here for about 3 days, and so we filled our crack back in, and I let it set for 2 to 3 days after I'd already filled it in also. So I'm hoping that filled it in all through this block here, and I'm hoping there's no more than just that one crack through this, but we're going to find out here in a minute. We're going to go ahead and start taking this apart and see how well this thing stayed together. Alright guys, so I finally got this out of the mold. There was a few mistakes that I made while I was doing this. So I want to go ahead and tell you about them because, I mean, they're pretty obvious if you've ever messed with this stuff before. I never have, so it's a learning curve, I guess. I should have done a little more research into it before I started. The first one being that I poured it too thick. I ended up doing a 3x3 by 4 inch block all in one setting. They recommend only doing an 1/8 inch thick at a time. I didn't realize that until after I'd already poured it. So if I'd have done this in 2 or 3 different settings, it probably would have done a lot better. But it did end up overheating, and it cracked up here for the heat to escape. So I went ahead and filled it in, hoping that went deep enough to actually fill that crack all the way through there, and I'm hoping it won't come apart on me as I'm trying to turn it. We'll find out whenever we're doing it. The second one was that I kind of got in a hurry putting this mold together because I had a little bit of a time crunch trying to get this together because I knew it took 3 days for it to fully cure. So I didn't take the time to coat the inside of the mold to keep it from sticking so bad, so it took a little while to get this out of the mold. I ended up using a hammer and screwdriver and broke the plywood apart because it was stuck so well onto here. And then I ended up using this plane right here to get it all nice and smooth on most of the sides. That way I can put it on the miter saw and cut these 2 sides here nice and flush. I wanted to do that because I wasn't sure which side I was going to use for, I'm going to glue this to a glue block, and I wanted a nice flat surface. And I wasn't sure which side I wanted to go with. The crack's further on this side, so I'm probably going to end up gluing this side just in case that breaks off. Hopefully I'll have a pretty good chunk over here that I can still work with. So yeah, so the game plan now is just to glue it onto a glue block. We'll let it set up for a little while, and then we'll start turning it and just kind of see how it goes. Alright guys, I've got my glue block put on here now, and I've got it set up pretty close here so that way I can get it on there fairly square. I've already went ahead and test fitted it and put some lines on here for a good reference to make sure it's fairly straight. So I'll just place this on here, and then I'll be able to put my glue on there and then slowly bring it up where it looks pretty close. I've also got my guard up here, or my tool rest, I apologize, so that way I can kind of eyeball how straight it is as well. Alright, it's probably not perfect, but it's pretty close, so we're going to go ahead and run some glue around this as well. I'll make sure and get a pretty good amount of glue on here to make sure it's going to hold really well. Alright, I got it glued up now, so I'm probably going to be using a mix of traditional style tools and the carbide tools. I'm not sure what's going to work better. I've seen people use both. So I'm probably going to start with the carbide tools to get these edges down because I know they're sharper. So that way I know, since I've got that crack that I am a little worried about, I don't want my traditional tools to end up getting a catch and it breaking it. So I'm going to go ahead and start rounding it off with the round carbide tool. Just to, like I said, that's sharper, and I'll take smaller little chunks out of it and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and start doing that real quick. Alright guys, I've got this pretty close to the shape that I want it to be, but as you can see there's quite a few holes in this because this actually had a bunch of holes in the wood itself. I don't have a pressure pot or anything, so that's why I've got some holes that showed up in the resin itself here in several places. And so I could leave them like that and make it look kind of rustic like I do with a lot of wormholes and stuff like that, because I think it looks really nice on some of the wood that I do. But I think I want to make this a little bit smoother at least. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these in with some CA glue and some of these brass shavings I've got here. I've got these from my local hardware store. I went to the place where they cut the keys and I just asked them for the brass shavings and they just gave them to me at no cost. So that was pretty nice. So I think that's going to be a pretty cool contrasting color to this blue and the wood color here. So that's my game plan. I'm going to rough it up on the inside of these here, and then I'm going to put a little coat of CA glue, fill it up with these brass shavings here, and then put some more over the top to make sure that the CA glue is all throughout the brass shavings to make it a good solid piece. So I'm going to do that to probably at least the bigger holes. I may not do it to all the little holes. I'm not entirely sure yet. But I'm definitely going to do it to the big holes here. It'll be a cool contrasting color and it'll help smooth all this out pretty good. So let's go ahead and start doing that now. Alright guys, so I've pretty well got it to the shape that I want it to be now. I think I'm just going to part it off at the smallest point right here, here in a little while, once it's finished and everything. But now what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and put another coat of epoxy over this whole thing to seal everything up pretty good. That way I can buff it up and it'll shine up pretty good. I may end up putting 2 coats over it, just kind of depends on how thick it is and how well it works out basically. Alright, so this is how it's looking right now after we put that the latest coat over it to cover up the wood and all these little spots here. It did help to fill in a lot of these holes. It is a self-leveling epoxy, so that's pretty nice. But it's not perfect. On all these spots right here where I put all the shavings and stuff in, some spots are real nice and smooth, and some spots have a couple little high spots. It's just a little bit more textured just around where this wood is. So I think what we're going to do is go ahead and sand it down again and then possibly put one more coat over the top of it. If it's still rough after that, we'll probably lightly sand it and end up buffing it out. So that's the game plan for now. Like I said, we're going to hand sand with 120 on these rougher spots and then put it on a low RPM and go ahead and sand the rest of the whole piece and put one more coat in it. Alright guys, so this is where we're at right at the moment. I've put another coat over the outside here. I'm about to put another one on here. I read some information on this type of resin specifically, and they said that if you can reapply another coat after you wait about 3 to 4 hours. That way it's still sticky and you don't have to sand anything or anything like that, and it'll just stick right to it. So we're going to put another coat on here to help fill in any voids and give me a little bit thicker of a layer to be able to sand some of this. The very first layer I had put on here after I had put the super glue and stuff in there, I ended up sanding it down to that super glue, and that the glue that I use is one that I'm not used to, so ended up being a little bit gummy as opposed to the hard setup that I normally get from this other brand that I've been using for a while. So I ended up having to dig some of that out, or actually I cut it off with a razor blade and stuff. So right now we're about to put another coat on here. and we'll let it set for another 3 hours, and we may end up putting one more. I'll just come back and look at it and decide what I'm going to do from there. But that way I can be able to sand it and buff it without going through these layers, basically. Alright guys, so we've got our 3 or 4 coats on here. We let dry really good for about, I want to say about 4 days now actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to come through here, and I've got a couple little imperfections I'm going to try and get out, mainly just this one spot right here. That, and I wanted to test out a new set of micro mesh I just got. I've never used that stuff before. I feel like this would be a good project for it. It's pretty nice and shiny like it is, and I could leave it alone, but like I said, I kind of want to try the micro mesh. So let's go ahead and start with that now. I'm going to hit this one spot with 120, and then we're going to go up through the grits over the whole thing, up through all the micro mesh, up to 12,000 I believe. So we're going to go ahead and try it out now. Let's get started. Alright guys, well here's the final product. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and following along with the three different episodes of it. It was actually a lot longer of a process than I anticipated. But anyway, like I said, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, leave those down in the comment section below. If you have any ideas for other projects you'd like to see, be sure and put that down there too. And I'll see you next time.